Hello, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Hello to you, and good to have you with us here today. Busy show coming up. It's Jon Stinchcomb. He stops by today. We'll talk to him about everything going on around UGA. Spring practice kind of rolls into gear here. There was good news for Glenn Schumann. Gives us a chance to have an important conversation, but the Georgia co-defensive coordinator will do that. ESPN is also weighing in, hyping up one of Georgia's games in the 2023 season. Now, it may seem a little early to get into this, and somewhat ESPN may be doing, may even feel like a little bit of a reach. But to me, it gives really good context for exactly what the mindset should be for Georgia right now and its fans as well. So what do you say we start with that? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I've told you all before, I'm a little bit of a carnival barker. You know, I like pro wrestling and amusement parks and all these things that some people sort of think of tacky. I just love them. I'm sort of a natural hype man by nature. You know, I just like that kind of stuff, you know, glitzy, glamorous, you know, stuff like that. I've never been to, like, say, Branson, Missouri, but I'd probably like it. You know, I've been to, you know, Las Vegas, all the stuff in lights. I'd probably like all that kind of stuff just because I just kind of like hype. I kind of like making something, you know, fun and making it feel big. And every now and then in the media, you see somebody who even takes that to sort of an extra level. And I thought there was kind of maybe an example of that the other day via ESPN. You know, it's never too early to start hyping up the upcoming games, the upcoming season. We think that's always kind of a fun thing to do. We love the offseason in college football because it creates a chance for us to sort of have a debate, helps us pass the time before the season actually gets here. And some of the crazy stuff you hear this time of year ends up being its own form of entertainment. Well, with that in mind, we talked about this a little bit on Friday. ESPN is going to put out a list for their what they call way too early top 25 teams, the season-defining games for each of these teams. Now, listen, as a hype man by nature, as sort of a, you know, amateur carnival barker, ESPN is absolutely sort of singing from my hymn book on this just a little bit, with the idea that we can already identify here in March what the season-defining game is going to be this fall. And even though you'll play 12 of them, this is the one that matters more than any other. And there's already a certain nature of hype associated with that. But when it comes to Georgia Bulldogs, who ESPN, rightly so, has as its preseason number one team right now, the hype that they give you for that first big game, not the first big game, but the number one rank on the list of the biggest games for Georgia here this upcoming season, once again, they kind of turn the hype up to a level that even sort of a hype man by nature like me would say, wow, that's kind of a lot. You might not be surprised to find out that Tennessee is the team that ESPN is hyping for Georgia. Mark Schlabach is the guy that's given the job of writing this blurb. And so I want to give this to you, and then I want to explain to you why, even if you kind of laugh at this, there is still a reason in which this sort of starts what I believe is a relevant conversation for UGA fans. Let me read you Mark Schlabach, ESPN.com here. About Georgia, he says their November 18th contest at Tennessee is going to probably be the most difficult game that Georgia plays. He says the Tennessee figures to, and listen to this quote, Tennessee figures to be out for blood after the Bulldogs knocked off the number one Volunteers 27-13 at Sanford Stadium last season in a game that Schlabach correctly points out wasn't even that close. So we certainly agree with Schlabach that the game last November for Georgia against Tennessee wasn't very close, and we certainly agree that Tennessee was humiliated that day because of its inability to keep pace with Georgia. We will acknowledge that they would love nothing more than to be able to go out and get revenge against Georgia here this season. We're just not quite so sure they're capable of fielding the kind of team that can do that. In other words, the emotion that Schlabach describes for Tennessee against Georgia, I'm sure that's there. I'm sure they are embarrassed by the fact that they were not ready for prime time coming into Athens last season. I'm sure they love the idea of creating the kind of home field advantage at Neyland Stadium here this year that rivals what Georgia put together in Athens last season. But believing that's going to be able to take place requires forgetting the fact that Georgia also humiliated Tennessee at Neyland Stadium in 2021, essentially did the same thing in 2019 there as well for a Georgia team that really wasn't all that great. The point is this idea that, you better be careful. If you're Georgia going up to Knoxville in November, you better be careful because Tennessee's going to be out for blood. Well, guess what? Tennessee, I think, thought it was out for blood, coming to Athens this past season, but ultimately it was them who ended up doing all the bleeding on that particular day. So, I don't hate the fact that Mark Schlabach is hyping up the Georgia-Tennessee game, or that ESPN is charging him with the duty of hyping up the Georgia-Tennessee game. I don't even hate the thought that Tennessee might be out for blood that day. I'm sure they'd love nothing more than to try to strike a blow of revenge against UGA. I just don't quite know as a team if they are capable of doing it. And, this is one of those things that I do think that Georgia should take, kind of seriously here for a moment, that you got a game coming up at some point in time. Even though your September schedule looks very easy, your October schedule looks very easy, eventually you're going to go on the road to a team that'll likely be pretty highly ranked there that day and may or may not be good enough to keep it close. Georgia should at least be aware that a game like that could loom here during the 2023 season. But if you listen to Georgia players talk, and they talk about these things quite a bit, the notion they're going to take Tennessee more seriously than any other game they'll play, there's just not much evidence that's the case, that Tennessee will probably get Georgia's best shot coming up in November, but that's only because Georgia gives its best shot to everybody. In fact, the other day, Javon Bullard was talking about that in the media session that he did, kind of his first media session here for the 2023 season. Bullard, one of the real stars at the end of last year when Georgia put together a national championship run, and the question came up about just the absolute total domination that Georgia showed against TCU in the national championship and what it was that kind of led to that. But as Bullard explains, and this is the kind of thing that Tennessee fans ought to be aware of, and everybody that plays Georgia prior to that, is that the same sort of focus and energy and intensity that Georgia brought to the TCU game, the national championship, is the same focus and intensity it wants to bring to every game, whether the opponent be out for blood or not. This is what Javon Bullard said about that just the other day.
My mindset just going into every game is treat every game like it's your first game. Like you play your hardest, whether it's the national championship. I feel like I played as hard as I did the Oregon game and I did versus TCU. And that was the first game of the season versus the last game of the season. But just keep every game the same game. Like, don't try to be too big in the moment. We don't need you to be anybody else but yourself. And that's the thing about this defense, man, and it's about this team in general. We just did what we had to do.
So I think that's all great from Javon Bullard. I think most of would say that's true. However, it's at this point that I kind of want to take the conversation into a slightly different direction, because I do think understanding the nature of the 2023 schedule does kind of help inform what Georgia's doing right now for spring practice. That Georgia is getting ready for an upcoming season, but this is a season that's a little bit different than previous Georgia seasons would have been. Last year, you can make a case that spring practice might have been slightly more important because Georgia was getting ready for a season opening game that was going to take place against Oregon. Now, that's not to say that that they're already preparing for Oregon during spring practice. We know that's not the case, but it is to say that there was a test coming right from the very beginning of the season. So all of your preparation in March, April, May, June, July, August, all of that preparation was perhaps a little bit more focused and perhaps a little bit more directed because, as players have told us in the past, there's just a different kind of energy when you know you're playing a big opponent in week one. And if that was true for Georgia in 2022, it was also potentially true for Georgia prior to the 2021 season there as well, when it knew it was going to go to Charlotte and open up against Clemson, a team that had won national championships, been a fixture in the playoff. There's just a little bit different kind of energy about such a big test coming so early in the season that pretty clearly a lot of your preseason preparation was maybe done in the back of the players' minds, knowing that, hey, we got to be ready to go right from the word go because we're going to face one of our biggest tests here at the very beginning of the season. But here in 2023, we don't expect that to be the case. Now, there is a chance that Georgia's just so good that nobody tests it. I mean, that's at least a possibility for the back-to-back national champions. There is just not a test that exists on this schedule because no team is actually capable of truly pushing Georgia in that direction. At least a possibility that's the case. But if we assume that Georgia is going to be tested at some point in time, then I do believe the ESPN writer Schlabach here is correct in pointing out that the most likely test is late in the season when it goes on the road to Tennessee as opposed to early in the season. This is a barren September schedule. Georgia was supposed to play at Oklahoma. By now you know the reasons that was canceled. So you're talking about the likes of Tennessee Martin and Ball State and, UAB. There's the game against South Carolina, but Georgia beat them 48-7 last year. You think about going on the road to Auburn. That's a first-year coach. You have no idea what that means. That ESPN is probably correct that Georgia's season might not be defined until very late when it goes on the road to Tennessee, which gives some of the work that Georgia's doing right now a little more time to actually work itself out. Different Georgia player here for a moment. Cedric Von Prawn-Granger, the terrific center for UGA, he was talking to the media the other day there as well, and he was kind of talking about his decision to return to Georgia and the new offense that's playing around that and the work that Georgia's doing to kind of get acclimated with a new voice offensive coordinator, a new starting quarterback, and the process that's undergoing there. And despite the fact that some of the terminology is staying the same and the overall vibe around Georgia staying the same, SVP says when he looks around here, he does see some differences. And so Georgia, because of the soft schedule early, has a little bit more time to work out some of those, new things. Here's Cedric Von Prawn kind of giving voice to all of that.
First of all, I just want to thank Coach Monk for everything he's done for us. I think he's done a tremendous job of making sure that, we were in great positions to be able to win. And, he deserves everything that's coming to him, and I'm so happy for him that he's gotten that position. And I think Coach Bobo has done a tremendous job stepping in. I think he's given us a lot of energy. I think he knows what he's talking about. He has a lot of different things that he presents. And to be honest, it's been really, really fun just to kind of have this new challenge of these new people and this, really how we look at it, new offense, new team, and just kind of approaching it in a way that this is something new. So, how are we going to attack it and what are we going to do about it to make sure it's successful?
Why do you look at it as a new offense?
Just for the simple fact of there's a couple of new pieces, and every year is different anyway. Nobody has a guaranteed starting spot. Nobody has solidified themselves in this offense yet. So when you go to add all of those pieces and you have to add that chemistry, new offensive coordinator, you got to learn tendencies, what he likes to call different situations, things like that. So to an extent, it is a bit new.
So there is no more articulate spokesman for the Georgia offense than Van Prawn. He knows the scene around here pretty well. He's been here for a while. And by my count, he used the word new 5 times in describing the Georgia offense, the transition from Monken to Bobo and the new quarterback that's going to be in place. It obviously sounds like Van Prawn thinks they can be really good in offense if you watch the full video, which you can see on the DawgNation YouTube page. Pretty clearly, Van Prawn right now sees this as an offense in transition, which all the more valuable then to not have your, if we believe ESPN here for a moment, all the more valuable then to not have your season-defining game until November, because that gives you just a little bit more time to sort of figure out during spring and during the summer what this new offense is exactly going to be. In fact, let me give you a number that sort of backs this up. Think about 4 different seasons in the Kirby Smart era here thus far: 2016, 2017, 2020, 21. These were seasons in which the quarterback that started the first game for Georgia did not become the eventual season-long starter, that the first game starter eventually became the backup at some point in time during that season. In 2016, it happened because of the emergence of Jacob Eason. In 2017, it happened because of the Eason injury. In 2020, it happened because of the, frankly, ineffective play of DeJuan Mathis. And in 2021, the story there with Stetson Bennett. That's 4 seasons in which the Georgia offense we saw week 1 was not quite the Georgia offense we saw for the lion's share of that season. Now, who knows how it plays out in 2023, but Georgia has used the in-season portion of the year to kind of figure itself out before, and it may be a luxury to be able to do that again this year if it's true that ESPN says that your season-defining game won't take place until November. But then there's finally this. The thing that I will always remember about the 2022 Georgia-Tennessee game, and in fact, a 15-0 season that included a national championship and a thrilling win against Ohio State, a dominant win against TCU, and about everything that you could have along the way to a back-to-back go for 2 and 22 type year. I think it's actually the Tennessee game for me that will be the most memorable moment from that season. When I think back on that year, it's the Tennessee game I think back on almost more than anything else. And the thing that I remember so much is the pride that Georgia took that day in being Georgia. And it wasn't just the players and the coaches. As we said going into the game, the fans were going to play a big role in all of this. The fans were going to kind of create the kind of atmosphere that, as Kirby Smart had said, Arkansas game in 2021 and times like that, adding to the point total for Georgia, taking points off the board that Tennessee might have been able to score or the opponent might have been able to score. We said the fans were going to have a role, and clearly they did that so well that particular day. That there was a real pride in Georgia being Georgia. There was pride in being the national championships and not national champions and not wanting to relinquish that crown, that title, not wanting to give it over to Tennessee after just 1 year of enjoying it. When you start thinking about 2023, it's pretty clear that pride still exists with UGA in the idea that there is a team in your own division for the final year we're going to have divisions in all likelihood who's out for blood to take that away from you. that might be just the exact kind of thing that gives you the focus that you need to truly go out there, and as we'll talk about eventually, go for 3 in 23. There was a statement that Javon Bullard made last week that has really rung in my ears ever since then. It wasn't about Tennessee, but it is about this particular topic. That the pride that Georgia takes in itself almost becomes more fully filled out when you have something that challenges it, the way that Tennessee did a year ago, the way that Ohio State did in the Peach Bowl or whatever else. But pretty clearly, after 2 straight national championships, the pride that Georgia has in itself, the pride the players have in their program, not diminished at all. If anything, it's been enhanced. And Bullard, who is so good at being a spokesman, also said that last week. Let me let you hear from a Georgia player one more time here.
Just wearing his G, like we said in the room, his G is darn near just important as your last name. This G is very important, and people love and respect this G. And you gotta, it's an honor for us, man, to wear this G. So you gotta respect it, whether you on the field, out the field, and you just gotta do what you gotta do in order to just not bring a bad name to this G and to your last name itself. So you really just gotta watch what you do, watch your surroundings, and just keep your head forward.
So let me sum all this up this way. Spring practice is ongoing in the SEC. ESPN looks up north to Knoxville and says, that's a team that's going to be out for blood against Georgia this season when the 2 teams play in November. However, down here in Athens, you've got guys like Javon Bullard saying, the G that I wear on the side of my helmet is just as important to me as my last name. You think that team's afraid about Tennessee being out for blood? You think the Georgia team that's about to play in 2023 is any less focused, any less intense than the one that dominated Tennessee a year ago? This is a lot of what spring practice is about. It's not just figuring out position battles, and it's not just kind of figuring out pecking order. It's also cultivating a mindset. And the mindset that Georgia appears to be cultivating right now, based on what Javon Bullard is saying right there, will be just as capable of managing any challenge in 2023 as it managed in 2022. There may be teams out for blood, but when you're number one, you definitely have a bullseye on your back. Sounds like Georgia's pretty comfortable with that right now. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and we're happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, we're on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 96 The Ref, available as a podcast wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, worldfamousDawgNation.com, just lots of ways for you to connect with our program. We really appreciate you doing that, and we certainly appreciate our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for making it all possible. You know, you've heard me talk about Pella windows and doors for a while now. You know that they're energy efficient. They also look great. So here's what that benefits you. Home feels better on the inside, looks better on the outside, better curb appeal, potentially improved resale value. For those of you that are homeowners, I know how you feel about wanting to do everything you can to take the best possible care of your home. Well, equipping it with those Pella windows and doors, those energy-efficient windows and doors that really allow your home to perform at like the optimum level, that's obviously a great thing to be able to do. So if you've heard me talk about it, if you're aware of the fact that survey after survey here in our market area demonstrates that homeowners recognize this as the true brand leader, then maybe the appropriate next step for you is to have that free initial consultation and you know, kind of have that sort of no-pressure consultation with one of those Pella experts. And by no pressure, I mean they're not pushing you to sort of sell anything. It's your choice to make if you want to buy it or not. But it's an educational conversation for you to put your hands on the product, especially if you stop by and see them there at that Duluth Experience Center, and kind of hear from one of those Pella experts about what makes the Pella windows and doors such a superior product. And after that, you can kind of talk about the installation options and everything that kind of come your way, financing options even if you want to do that. You can even find out about some great savings there as well, because a few more days to take advantage of this. Between now and March 26th, you can get 50% off qualifying installations or no payments, no interest until 2024. So stop by and see them in their Experience Center in Duluth, or visit them online, pellaofga.com/DawgNation. That's pellaofga.com/DawgNation. Or you can give them a call, 678-638-1429. That is 678-638-1429. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. I'll also tell you this, while I've got your attention, that we had a great series up at DawgNation.com right now. Jeff Sintel, Kaylee Manziel, part of this. It's what we call our Next Generation series. It's presented by Pella Windows and Doors. So really good look at like Monroe Freeling, and I think I forget who I think it was Raylan Wilson was at the most recent one. But it's a great look at some of the newcomers to the Georgia program, all courtesy of Pella Windows and Doors. I hope you'll check that out on the DawgNation video channels and DawgNation.com and all that there as well. All right, we have a very busy show coming up. I do need to pause for a moment. And, you know, there are a lot of times in which, you know, like real life just sort of creeps in. And this is one of those for me, and I promise I'll be brief about this. but it's just kind of been a hard year. You've heard me say that before. We've obviously experienced that around the Georgia football community. I've kind of dealt with some of this personally. My grandmother passed away recently, and I'm sad to let you know that my wife's mom also passed away over the weekend. Now, my specific reason for telling you this is because it's going to impact my schedule a little bit. The funeral is going to be on Wednesday. I don't quite know what that means for us here as of yet. I just don't know. But that is a thing that's going on. And as I told you before, it is a hard year. I have to go ahead and let you know that this is maybe not the last time I'll be talking to you about something like this on my side here this year. It's just kind of the way that it is here right now. I am so grateful. Her name was Martha. My kids called her Grammy. I'm so grateful for her impact in my life because, she raised a girl that has made me very, very happy. And to have that kind of experience in my life, the great family that I have because of the influence that she had on my now wife, how do you put a price tag on that? She was not the world's biggest Georgia football fan, but she became one because of me. And she had no relationship with technology whatsoever, but she also sort of figured out how to watch the show each and every day there as well, which is just kind of a little bit of a window into what she did for those that she cared about. She was interested in what they were interested in. She found a way to support them in whatever that was, whether it be me or my wife's brother, or my grandkid, or her grandkids, my children. Just it's a hard time for our family here right now. Many of you kind of know that. You've got your own hard things that you're going through here right now. So I at least want to be honest with you about what's going on in my life. We obviously started to deliver this show on a consistent basis. I don't know what this means for us yet on Wednesday, but I do just want to kind of put that out there and celebrate the life of a woman who is very, very special, but to also kind of let you know it is going to have at least some impact on our show here this week. So no easy way to kind of transition back to a regular conversation there, but we are going to try to have a fun show. We've hopefully already gotten off to a pretty fun start, and we're going to try to keep that going despite the circumstances. Jon Stinchcomb here comes up in just a moment. We also want to go around the doghouse here right now. And Around the Doghouse provides us an opportunity to revisit a topic we talked about the other day. You may remember there had been some reporting out there that Georgia co-defense coordinator Glenn Schumann was a candidate for the Philadelphia Eagles defensive coordinator job. Now, what we said was, let's wait and see what happens with Schumann after this because, Eagles play for the Super Bowl. Schumann's still really, really young. The idea that he could leave Georgia, go be Eagles defensive coordinator, maybe that's real or maybe this is one of those things that sort of gets put out there, whatever else. Let's wait and see what kind of financial compensation Schumann gets as a way of determining how real all of this might have been, overtures from the Philadelphia Eagles or who knows who else. If the Eagles thing became public, there could have been other teams behind the scenes there as well. Well, guess what? We do have a little bit different picture of the Schumann compensation package now, and it kind of leads us to believe that all those rumors involving Schumann in Philadelphia, well, they must have been true. Let me read you this. Mike Griffith, DawgNation.com, on the subject of Glenn Schumann here for a moment. Schumann getting a very big raise for the upcoming season. Mike writing that Georgia co-defense coordinator Glenn Schumann is going to receive a $1.9 million salary in 2023. That is more than double his salary from a year ago. Now, you also find out that Mike Bobo is going to make $1 million next year. I guess he's also still getting paid some from Auburn, so fun to think about Auburn paying Bobo to score touchdowns against it here this year. That's always a fun deal. But that's why Bobo may be a little bit lower than the overall market rate right now for a top-level offensive coordinator. But the thing we're talking about now is Glenn Schumann. Schumann going to be paid $1.9 million next season, which leads you to believe that whether it be the Eagles or other teams, whatever else, that folks came hard after Schumann, and Schumann has decided to stay at UGA, which to me is a total validation of the culture and the program that exists at Georgia, the fact that Schumann still wants to be a part of it, even working in kind of a co-defensive coordinator type role here right now. And to me, this is also a little bit of a validation for Schumann there too. Glenn Schumann is pretty clearly a coaching talent on the rise, and Georgia would appear to be still very lucky to have him. And as Georgia goes for its third straight national championship this season, or go for 3-23 if you will, as Georgia gets ready to do all of that, Schumann is a real weapon in the arsenal to be able to get that done. In fact, let me give you some words here that I played for you before of Will Muschamp, who kind of works with Schumann as co-defense coordinator. A lot of folks sort of think of Will Muschamp as the veteran, and Will Muschamp's the real engine that makes this defense go. That's Kirby Smart's buddy. That's Kirby Smart's friend, and Schumann's just there to sort of learn from Will Muschamp. But trust me when I tell you that that is not the correct picture here in all of this, that Will Muschamp is, of course, a very sharp coach in his own right. But from Muschamp's own words, the guy that gets a chance to work with, Glenn Schumann, is truly, as we said before, a coaching star on the rise. This is what Muschamp said about Schumann last August.
I knew of Glenn, but I didn't really know Glenn till last year, and had a wonderful working experience with he and Dan and Trey Scott. And obviously Coach Smart is on the defensive side of the ball a lot. But we had a really good rapport as far as our, what we needed to do to be successful, and there's nothing's going to change with that. We have a great working relationship. Glenn's promotion, in my opinion, is very well deserved. He's an outstanding football coach. He's extremely bright. He has a great rapport with his players. And you really look at Coach Smart's going in the 7th season here at Georgia. The 2 longest tenured coaches are Glenn and Dale McGee. And you really look over those 7 years, consistency of their position groups probably is the best that's been here in those 7 years. Arguably, I'm sure there's different years, but his position's been very productive. He's recruited extremely well at his position. He's just an outstanding football coach. He has a very good understanding of what we do defensively, how we adjust things out, and he's always looking for a better way to do it, and always researching those things and what can we do to get better in those situations. But I really enjoy working with Glenn just because the intelligence, the football intelligence he has, and the passion he brings to the job every single day, because those things are really important, and the players see that, and they understand how invested he is in them.
So I've gone very, very long here, so let me try to sum this up in 2 quick things here. Thing number 1 is this. Glenn Schumann has had this great reputation as being a great recruiter, and that's a reputation that's well earned. But if teams like the Philadelphia Eagles are calling for him in such an aggressive manner that Georgia has to pay Schumann $1.9 million to keep him, they are not coming after him because of his recruiting abilities. The NFL doesn't care about that. That's not what you do in the NFL. They believe that Glenn Schumann's also a good on-field coach as well. So the fact that Georgia has Schumann's acumen still a part of this coaching roster here for this upcoming season, that is truly a very valuable commodity. But there's also this. If you think about Georgia as kind of a long-range story here, Glenn Schumann is clearly a young coach that's thriving at Georgia, despite the fact that there are veteran coaches also in this coaching roster. And the way in which Schumann is thriving, getting job opportunities, getting paid, eventually, much like his predecessor Dan Lanning, moving on to be a head coach, would make you believe that if you're a young coach, that Georgia's the kind of place you want to be. Much the same way there's never enough good players to go around, there are also never enough quality coaches to go around. Finding good coaches that can fill out your coaching roster is just as hard as filling out your player roster there as well. So the fact that Georgia can point to proofs of concept, guys like Dan Lanning, now Glenn Schumann, only makes other young coaches who want to be upwardly mobile more attracted to a place like UGA there as well. So $1.9 million is pretty clearly good news for Glenn Schumann, and while he doesn't plan on giving any of that money to me, I'm not guessing, it's good news for all of us who are truly Georgia fans. It shows you that the Georgia machine is making stars out of its young coaches, which means there'll be another crop of young coaches looking forward to being at Georgia here very, very soon. That is Around the Doghouse, and good to have you here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Before we're done the program, some recruiting news. Georgia got a commit here recently. We'll give you a brief reaction to that. We can also confirm 5-star quarterback Dylan Raiola's presence in Athens here this weekend. We obviously talked to Jeff Sintel a lot about that on Friday, so we've got all of that coming up for you. But I told you, I went a little long on the top here, and I apologize for that. I'm late getting to Jon Stinchcomb, but his opinion, valuable nonetheless, on what's happening right now with Georgia spring practice, the emergence of Glenn Schumann as one of the real rising stars in the coaching ranks at either the college or the NFL level, whatever choice he wants to make there, and so much more. Let's do it with Jon Stinchcomb here right now on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia and our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with Jon Stinchcomb. Happy to have him on the program here today, and apologize for getting to him late. Boy, we are running late today. Hate that. But nonetheless, John, let me bring you in on the discussion we were just having here. Glenn Schumann gets a big raise, leads me to believe that whether it be the Eagles or maybe even some unknown commodities here, somebody came after him and a young coaching star on the rise, more than just a great recruiter, although there may not be a better recruiter on this Georgia coaching staff than Schumann, gives you an idea that Georgia's got a pretty valuable commodity in Schumann, and it is great news, I believe, for the program that it's able to hold on to him for at least another year. Is that your take on all this as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it shows the value that the staff and really the entire athletic department has in Glenn Schumann and his ability to contribute to the program, and also the fact that he's a coveted commodity, that he has earned his way into the conversation for a lot of teams that see him as an upgrade of what they currently have and what they can offer. So, again, this speaks to the landscape of Georgia football these days, and you can't make the comparisons to yesteryear of what a coordinator made and their role just because of the explosion and exponential growth in what college football looks like to a university these days.
Yeah, and to me, prior to the 2021 season, Dan Lanning had a chance to leave Georgia and go to Texas. This was right when Steve Sarkisian had been hired there. Obviously, Texas has got seemingly an unlimited wallet, and so therefore you assume that they really came after Lanning with a big opportunity money-wise, and Lanning chose to stay at Georgia. And I said a lot in that 2021 year that Lanning's decision to stay at Georgia, I think, was kind of an underrated reason why that Georgia was able to win the national championship. Clearly, Kirby Smart's a great defensive coach, and there's a lot of good defense coaches here, but I thought that Lanning kind of brought a spice to all of this. And I think the Schumann thing here from a timeline standpoint feels a little similar to me. That, listen, if Glenn Schumann had gotten a big opportunity, had taken it and gone somewhere else, then, more power to him, I guess. And Georgia probably would have still been fine even with the coaches that it still has in place. But there's something about holding on to this young energy, like Lanning in 2021, Schumann here right now. There is something to me about holding on to that kind of gives Georgia the right kind of boost going into this 2023 season there as well. I think this is one of those headlines that could get lost a little bit, but I truly think this is substantial news, but also very good news for Dog fans.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Coach Schumann has done an absolutely incredible job. I think they've got great rapport on that defense. I know there's, folks look at the comparison of salaries between Schumann and Muschamp and recognize that those are two different animals, and what Muschamp's still getting paid from his previous head coaching job and et cetera. But you look back at the history of the position, right? DC at Georgia and what Coach Lanning did, and really the improvement that he brought to the program and the synergy that was created, and we've only grown from that. And I appreciate the opportunity that Coach Lanning had, what he brought to the table, and then recognize that he saw a unique opportunity that he had to take advantage of. And let's be honest, at some point that will happen for Coach Schumann as well. And I'm grateful that it's not this year where he's moving on to a bigger position, a bigger role, a bigger opportunity, especially looking at across the ball and seeing that there's a big change in the offensive coordinator position. So I think anytime you have the opportunity, one, to create some continuity from year to year, and two, retain some high-level real quality at any of the positional coaches, much less a coordinator spot, it's really good for the program when you're able to retain pieces like Coach Schumann.
I think that's right. I want to transition to something else I also talked about before you joined us, which is ESPN's kind of having some fun. They're already kind of hyping the Georgia-Tennessee game. I don't quite know that Tennessee's going to be good enough to be as much of a challenge to Georgia as ESPN suggests that it might, but I still think the idea of, in this final year, we believe, of the SEC East, that there is a potentially formidable foe. I think anything like that has a tendency to want to kind of focus your direction a little bit, and that might turn out to be good for Georgia. But also, John, as I said before you joined us, the idea that Georgia might not be really, if it's challenged at all, the fact that it might not be really challenged until November, I think gives Georgia a little bit of a luxury that the stuff it's trying to figure out during spring practice, it can stretch that into the summer. And the stuff it wants to figure out this summer, it can even stretch that into the season if it wants to. There are 4 different instances in which Georgia decided to start a different starting quarterback at some point than the guy it started with at the beginning of the year here during the Kirby Smart era. Maybe there's that opportunity for this quarterback battle here this year there as well, too, to kind of also be extended into the season. The point is that if Tennessee really is Georgia's biggest game and it doesn't take place in November, then to me that also kind of shapes the way in which Georgia will go through its preseason preparations. What do you think of all that?
I agree. I think you look at the opportunity for a quarterback to develop and get some actual real game reps against opponents that probably don't strike the same fear in your hearts as some later on in the season, especially. Let's be honest, the SEC is still the best conference, but there's space that's been created between Georgia and most programs in any location across the country, and specifically in the East and the SEC. That's not to say that you can just roll your hats out there and expect to win. I don't see that happen. I think there are going to be some close games this year where we're going to be talking about it afterwards. Like, do you think is Georgia not as good, or is this program better? Or do they have No, I mean the sports are competitive for a reason, and just because on paper Georgia should win does not mean all these games leading up to Tennessee are going to be cakewalks. I think you can expect some growing pains, and anytime there's a changing of the guard, much less at any position, but specifically at quarterback, there's a transition period. Anytime you have a coordinator that changes, there's a transition. So I think all the national talking heads are right in looking at the schedule and saying, that in years past, there's probably a more difficult walk that you have to take to get to where you want to go. And rightfully that you pencil in and circle that Tennessee game as one of the biggest tests that Georgia will face during this season. But that's not to say that there's not challenges throughout this season and this schedule for Georgia that are going to really test them, and you're going to have to improve as the year goes.
I think you're bringing up a really important point. I've talked about this before, that if you look at the last team that won back-to-back national championships, ironically, was a team that Kirby Smart was on the coaching staff for, Alabama in 2011, 2012. However, their chance at a third straight national championship was upended by the most unpredictable team probably of all. You have an Auburn, team with a glorified high school coach leading the program and a defensive back playing quarterback, and yet they win the Kick Six game. They go on to win the SEC. They almost beat Florida State for the national championship. That's the kind of thing that prior to that no one would have seen coming. And it's really not my, belief that there's necessarily going to be that kind of team that steals Georgia's joy this year. But, John, I do think, I don't care, how much you love UGA, and I would say that you and I love them as much as anybody could. I don't care how much you love UGA. You have to be on guard for a surprise here this season, because college football does have a way of surprising you.
Yeah, I think Michigan would love to play TCU again. I think Georgia a couple years ago, when Brian McClendon was leading a pretty dilapidated South Carolina team, that team would want that game back, right? I mean, you look back and you say, how did this team end up winning? Or in our case, how did we end up losing? And that's one of the joys of college football, really any sport, but specifically college, that it's truly any given Saturday, and you have to show up and play. And if you make boneheaded decisions and you give the ball away and you create opportunities for a team, that every team that Georgia faces is going to try to knock them off. That's the measuring stick. We circled the Tennessee game as folks in the media of what to watch. Every team that plays Georgia has that game circled. That is the measuring stick. That's the bar that they need to clear. So you can expect their best. It's hard when you're that top dog. You hear Coach Belichick in years past, Coach Saban talk about it, that it's a real challenge to get to the top, and it's even harder to stay there. And that's because everyone's gunning for you. And I appreciate and love the approach that Coach Smart laid out last year, that we're not going to be the hunted, we're the hunter. And you just have to expect that every time you play, you're going to get the team's best, and you better be willing to match or exceed that level of commitment and that energy that you bring to the table. It's our
Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with Jon Stinchcomb, and of course he's our insider talking UGA football, but you can be the next best thing. You can be a Marlowe's Tavern insider. In fact, you can join the Insider Club at Marlowe's Tavern for free, and I've talked to so many people who've done this. It's really a great way to take advantage of something you may already be doing, which is enjoying the chef-inspired food and the craft cocktails for which Marlowe's Tavern is famous. So here's how it works. When you go to marlowstavern.com and sign up to be a part of the Insider Club, first of all, it's free to join, and it is a special thank you for joining. you get $10 off a $30 order just for signing up. That's a big thank you just for joining the Marlowe's Tavern Insider Club. And after that, you go for what's called qualified visits. That means when you spend at least $15 at Marlowe's, you're going to earn a qualified visit. And once you get 4 of those qualified visits, you'll receive a complimentary entree reward up to $20 at your next visit to the Marlowe's Tavern, including the one right there in your neighborhood. So you can do this at any Marlowe's Tavern. So find out at marlowestavern.com more information on that. That is marlowestavern.com for more information on that. And, of course, all these big games and all the excitement that come up in the 2023 season, all of this, the preparation to get ready for those games taking place right now at spring practice. John, it's been going on for a couple of days. Media got to watch a brief window of this the other day. There's some chatter, there's some discussion out there thus far. It seems like quarterbacks about what you'd expect, and some of the other stuff that's going on maybe a little bit similar to what folks would have thought there as well. What's the early buzz that you've kind of paid attention to, or maybe what's something you'd like to see a little bit more of or hear a little bit more about as we roll towards G-Day coming up on April 15th?
Yeah, I think it's the expected chatter, right? I mean, everyone wants to focus on the quarterback rotation and who's in the early lead, and that's to be expected. I don't think you're going to get a complete picture at this point as to who's going to be the guy under center based on the entirety of spring ball. But what you can do is kind of to start framing that picture of what it's going to look like. And, you know, quarterback is obviously the marquee position where most of the focus is, but there's a number of places that you're looking around going, I wonder how this position group is going to be deployed. I look forward to seeing how that secondary shapes out and who is where. I want to see what happens with the outside linebacker positions. How do we replace the leadership that was lost on the defense? How do you create those opportunities for guys like Nolan Smith and Robert Beal Jr., who have been, seems like they've been at Georgia for at least a decade, specifically Nolan. And not only their playmaking ability on the field, but the leadership opportunity. So this spring practice, it gives these guys time to continue to build. And, you know, like we saw last year, I think Georgia was one of the top 5 teams in numbers of reps that freshmen and redshirt freshmen were getting across any program. So to see that level of success with guys that are so young and contributing early needs to be a mainstay for Georgia, because, you know, now it's almost like they're the seasoned vets, which is crazy because they've been on campus for some of them maybe a year if they were early enrollees. But that's kind of the nature of college right now is you're going to rely on some of these younger players to come in and develop. And I think that's why you're seeing these freshmen really that should still be seniors in high school trying to get in and part of the program quickly. So this spring practice is really, aside from bowl game practices, their first chance at carving out space for themselves to contribute when the fall rolls around. So how are these younger early enrollees and guys that were freshmen or redshirt freshmen last year, how are they staking claims to some of these position groups? I think that's some of the bigger storylines that we all should pay attention to as this spring practice rolls out.
And I'll finish with this on that, I guess, kind of same note is I'm obviously not a former player, you are, but the picture I have in my mind is that moment when you transition from having competed against high school players and having worked at a kind of a high school pace to now being at Georgia where you're competing against, you know, the monsters of their own high school, wherever that was, all across the country, but also operating at this unbelievable pace. And that's one thing that you do notice is when you go to Georgia practice. I don't get a chance to go to all the practices the media gets to because I don't live in Athens, but when I am there, it's the pace that's the first thing you notice. The way in which, rep goes boom, 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 and guys move from one station to the next, and there's just this constant motion where you're constantly having to be aware of what you're supposed to do next, but also just physically being able to keep up with it. John, how hard is that for a guy transitioning from high school to sort of step onto that college field and try to get acclimated and comfortable with this as quickly as possible? The pace of these college practices, especially at a place like Georgia, is just so different, I'm imagining, than what most of these guys are used to.
Oh, it's got to be. And, we're 2+ decades removed from when I experienced it. But the speed and power at which, specifically in the box, that you have to operate for these young guys, offensive, defensive linemen, outside linebackers, tight ends. That leap is significant, and same probably holds true on the perimeter for the wide receivers and secondary guys, but specifically, if you're looking at the interior, you're used to going up against a lot of players that are no longer playing football when you're in the high school ranks, and when you're lined up across an Amarius Mims, it's a little bit different, right? It's different when you've practiced against some of the very best across the college football landscape. If you're an interior lineman and Cedric Von Prawn is across from you, you can pretty much expect that you better have eaten your Wheaties and gotten in the weight room, because it's a lot different when you face, national championship level line play, offense, defensive line wise. I think that's why it's so impressive when you look and you see, Ernest Green. How has that development come along? Because that jump is significant, and Friday Night Lights, even against the very best, is going to be hardly comparable to what you experience every day in practice. And so I think getting up to speed and why guys come early is so that they can recognize the work that they need to put in, specifically in the weight room and between practices, that get you that opportunity to actually contribute when the season rolls around.
Jon, it's great stuff. I appreciate you being a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. I'm looking forward to our Marlowe's Tavern VIP Insider Lunch here this week there as well. And your insight always so valuable when we talk Georgia football. So thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of it. And, of course, we'll look forward to doing it with you here on our program again very soon as well.
I always enjoy it. I'm looking forward to tomorrow getting some Marlowe's. And so you get a double dose of me this week, B.A.
I'm always happy to do that, Jon. We'll look forward to it.
All right, brother. Go Dogs.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, Jon, a great guy. We had such a great response to our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Lunch. Really appreciate everybody who signed up. Can't wait to hang out with a few folks here this week on all of that. That is going to be a great time. By the way, speaking of great times, also almost a month away from our DawgNation cruise coming up as we go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. We've been highlighting as of late a few of our DawgNation Daily audience members, whether they be listeners, viewers, whatever else, who have been taking their own Royal Caribbean cruise vacations. I love all of that, and I'll remind you as we head towards spring and summer, great time to get booked up on your own Royal Caribbean cruise. Jessica Slater is a terrific travel agent to use, by the way. We think the experience of booking a Royal Caribbean cruise is made better when you use a great travel agent, because this is one of those things where, and I'm being as candid as I can be right here because I've obviously have some experience with this, is that there's a lot to consider when you book a Royal Caribbean cruise. You've got different stateroom types, you've got different itineraries, obviously different ports to embark from. There are a lot of variables to consider, and if you don't have a lot of experience cruising, or maybe you haven't cruised in a while, then kind of dealing with the with all the different variables can be a lot to do. And so someone like Jessica, who's a great travel agent, she's specifically recommended for us by Royal Caribbean. It's very interesting that Royal Caribbean actually encourages you to use a travel agent when you book a cruise, and the one we had specially selected for us was Jessica. So this actually comes from Royal Caribbean. They believe your experience will be made better by using a great travel agent. And so I want you to give Jessica a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. If nothing else, you can talk to her about the video you're seeing on the screen, the debut of Icon of the Seas, January 2024. Not too soon to start thinking about that, and maybe not even too soon to start booking your Icon of the Seas travel. Jessica can help you with all of that. All right, let's go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, and we'll kind of squeeze in here a recruiting note here. Five-star quarterback Dylan Raiola, as promised, did take his visit to Georgia. Also took a visit, I guess, Georgia Tech there as well. Let me show you this on the screen. Steve Wiltfong, 24/7 Sports, writing, that Ryle and his family enjoyed a weekend trip to see Georgia and Georgia Tech. Maybe the first time I've seen Wilt Fong write about Georgia Tech and recruiting in quite some time. But nonetheless, you've heard me jokingly say before, I don't know that anything sells Georgia better than a stopover at Georgia Tech for a little comparison and contrast there on that of, hey, you can have this at Georgia, or this is what sort of average Division I FBS level school looks like. Probably a pretty good comparison there if you're Georgia. But nonetheless, Raiola showing some respect to Buster Faulkner. And honestly, I mean, I think a lot of Georgia fans, they're in kind of a weird spot when it comes to Buster Faulkner because clearly they can't root for Tech to have any success. That's clean old-fashioned hate. But do they kind of like Buster and they kind of, hope that he is what they thought he was as an analyst on the program? Yeah, maybe that's the case. Maybe that is indeed the case. So, Faulkner at the very least gets a visit from Raiola. That's something that previous coaches couldn't have done, had they, promised a trip around the world, so Buster Faulkner's at least doing that. And by the way, in the absence of Faulkner at Georgia, it seems like a lot of folks kind of wonder, well, what's next from kind of the analyst standpoint because Faulkner's not there. Bobo's now offensive coordinator. What happens to that analyst that's kind of been the guy that's sort of been the quarterback whisperer in the past? It seems like a guy you may have heard of, the son of Brian Van Gorder, Montgomery Van Gorder. They call him Gummy. That's his nickname, Gummy. This is a guy that, sort of a fixture on the high school scene for a while. Was at Buford, was at North Hall as a quarterback, and then obviously the son of Brian Van Gorder. It seems like he's doing some good work kind of in that analyst role now for Georgia. So a lot of folks kind of wonder what was next on that. Gummy Van Gorder may be one of those quality control offensive analysts that you start to hear a little bit more about there at a place like Georgia. But the point here is that Raiola was at UGA. Sounds like he enjoyed the visit. We'll talk to Jeff Sintel more about that coming up. I saw where Laramie Tunsil, the former Ole Miss Rebel offensive tackle, has re-signed with the Houston Texans. I think it's $50 million guaranteed, $75 million overall, which now makes him the highest paid offensive lineman in the NFL. And this is one of those things, you're about to hear highest paid a lot because there's an inflated salary cap in place. I don't mean inflated in terms of it's higher than it should be. I mean that it's just higher than it was. Inflated salary cap now in the NFL, and so a lot of free agents that are in this kind of time right now who get a chance to re-sign, they're going to be putting up record numbers as they do. Tunsil just the latest example of that, but it's also a reminder of what Tunsil has become in the NFL. I mean, good enough to generate this kind of salary after one of the most embarrassing draft nights we'd ever seen when the video came out of the marijuana and the whatever and the mask and the whatever. Everybody kind of remembers all of that. And it's a little bit of a reminder that, listen, if you have something embarrassing come out about you prior to the draft, near the draft, obviously it's the kind of thing that's going to, give NFL teams pause. And I would say with good reason. Remember, this is a league in which coaches don't last very long, GMs don't typically last very long. There is not tons of job security, and none of these men are going to risk their professional future on you if you give them any reason to doubt you. That's just the nature of the beast and kind of a risk-averse profession like this where everybody's trying to hold on to their job for at least another year. But we also have evidence here that draft day embarrassments or pre-draft embarrassments are also not always a signal that the career itself is not going to turn out to be what it's supposed to be. In the case of Laramie Tunsil, I'd say the Houston Texans, who don't have much going for them, are probably pretty happy to have him. They're clearly paying him like that. So think about that with this upcoming NFL draft there as well. You're going to hear about red flag this and blah, blah, blah that. And in some cases, that may even hit a little close to home. But in the case of Tunsil, you can't have a more embarrassing draft night than Tunsil had. And yet, and he even put something on social media about this the other day, all he's doing is counting money right now. So just sort of keep that in mind, that sometimes these red flags don't turn out to necessarily be a harbinger of doom. I'll also mention one more thing here before we wrap up our SEC through, which is I would say that it's a pretty good time for the SEC and the NCAA tournament. It's sort of better to be the SEC than Big Ten right now, I would say. Pretty embarrassing tournament for that league, as most people, I think, kind of predicted. A lot of paper tigers near the top of the Big Ten. That sort of turned out to be true. You've got Tennessee advancing by beating Duke, and I'll take my medicine on this a little bit. This is not a Tennessee team that I thought was capable of being in the second weekend of the NCAA tournament, but pretty clearly yesterday, when I thought was a pretty good game, they showed themselves truly capable of doing that. They're just simply tougher than what Duke is. Duke is the worst stereotype, the worst caricature of what it always is. Kind of a front-running team. When the basketball is pretty, they're certainly the best at that. But when the basketball gets a little bit more rough and tumble, they quite can't handle the heat, and that's kind of what happened there against Tennessee. It seemed like it was a game that was somewhat officiated a little bit loosely, and then obviously plays in the hand of the physically imposing Vols, and for the most part, Duke kind of wilted under all of that. So this is a Tennessee team that I did not see advancing. I'll give them credit for doing so. I'll also shout out Eric Musselman here, the Arkansas coach, who certainly in that particular sport looks like he's on his way to being one of the most respected men in that profession. He has, once again, Arkansas playing a very impressive brand of basketball, and I think they're worth paying attention to. They got a game coming up against UConn this upcoming Thursday. Arkansas only an 8 seed, but I think you got to take them seriously here in the rest of this tournament. I think Musselman, his coach, one of the big reasons why. And then finally, I'll say this, and this is one of those honesty compels you to admit type of things, is that if you are a fan who kind of viewed this tournament as an opportunity to root against Alabama, hoping that Alabama doesn't win the national championship, I got to imagine this was a pretty tough weekend for you overall. And on the opposite side of that coin, if you're an Alabama fan, I think you've got to feel much better about your chances of winning the national championship. I really wasn't all that aware of what their pre-tournament odds to win the title were. I would be interested to know how much they may have changed, though, here over the course of that first weekend, where a lot of the teams that I thought were capable of beating Alabama are no longer in this tournament, which maybe means they weren't that capable to begin with. But my assumption is, hey, an Arizona team or a Kansas team, these were teams that if you were looking for the option to maybe wrestle away this trophy from Bama, those were your best chances. Now they're gone. Let me ask you this, for those of you who follow this tournament at all, how many teams do you realistically view as capable of beating Alabama? Now, there is a chance that we have kind of a, Kevin Ollie, UConn national champion this year, and sort of some sort of weird team kind of without the, kind of seeming building blocks for title ends up winning it. But if we assume that a championship level team is going to win the championship, how many of those other than Alabama are still remaining? I guess UCLA, I would certainly give them a strong chance. But beyond that, who's really capable of doing this? On the one hand, I guess any kind of surprise could happen. But if you're looking for the most likely teams to beat Alabama, most of those that I would have said prior to the tournament are no longer playing. So it is getting, to me, all that much more likely that the Crimson Tide could cut down the nets, and their process of fully becoming a basketball school, I guess, could be completed. So we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Quick shout-out here on the recruiting note for Georgia. Obviously, recruiting time heating up. A lot of visitors to the Dogs over the course of the last few days, including high-profile guys this past weekend. But also DeMello Jones, let's give a shout-out here, great-looking athlete out of Swainsboro, great talent-rich part of our state, making his commitment here to the University of Georgia. Really nice edit right there. This is a guy that's ranked inside the top 200 in terms of the overall recruits, and said before, kind of listed as an athlete. You want to read more about him there at DawgNation.com. Jeff Sintel has got a great story coming on the heels of his recruitment. It sounds like there had been a little bit in the works between Jones and Georgia here for a while, and he went ahead and pulled the trigger just the other day. So good story up at that on DawgNation.com about what I believe, the 10th member of this 2024 class for Georgia. So things starting to come together here nicely. And I think Georgia has already a lot more recruiting momentum for the 2024 class at this point in the year than it probably had this time a year ago. We saw how well that worked out last year. So, the hope remains that maybe this could be as good as, if not the best recruiting class that Kirby Smart's put together here at UGA. Early results suggest that's a possibility. And congratulations to DeMello Jones joining in on that here last week. And with that, we'll wrap things up here today. All right, on a different note, first of all, the Lady Dogs season came to an end. They did lose to Iowa in the NCAA tournament yesterday, so we wish them well as they move into the offseason. A good run there, beat Florida State first round, then lost to Iowa, so not great news for them yesterday. Even worse news for the Diamond Dogs on the field, but we'll use our golden shoe here as sort of a good news, bad news situation. The bad news is Georgia looked awful against South Carolina, just absolutely awful. But the good news is I do like these new baseball uniforms. Kind of a cream look here with the red script writing for Bulldogs. That's an awesome-looking uniform. So we'll give them a golden shoe for some really nice duds. But unfortunately, not a great weekend on the field for the Diamond Dogs. Honesty, once again, compels you to admit. However, it'll be better news for Georgia coming up later on this fall in Jacksonville, and what is possibly the final cocktail party of all time. Georgia getting a win again against those lousy, stinking Gators. How about this? 2s across the board. My daughter calls this an angel number, 222. 222 days from right now. We'll make that our Gator countdown, and we'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. We're going to take some comments here and kind of see what you got going on, and then we'll kind of bounce out of here because that is what we're going to do. All right, let me go to YouTube first. Let us see. All right, over here on YouTube, Visor says Bama's a basketball school now. Yeah, I guess so. Foster Moss. Very funny comment. Frank Patterson, the subject of a 6'5", 2025 quarterback that visited this week. Is that you talking about McIntyre? Is that who that is? The guy they offered the scholarship to the other day? Guatemala Mike, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. Thank you. And Juju also visited here recently too, right? That's the guy that, over the course of this upcoming year, I do believe that Julian Lewis is likely to be the most talked about player in the state. And that's not any disrespect to Mike Matthews, who I think is probably the most exciting player in the state. And, Buford's got a pair of guys who are, good enough to go literally anywhere they want to go. This is a pretty talent-rich state right now, as it always is. 2024 class, maybe a little bit more so than normal. But I believe that Julian Lewis, the soon-to-be sophomore quarterback from Carrollton, is going to be the most talked-about player in the state. When it's all said and done, he's going to rival one of the most talked-about prospects in state history. So you're going to start hearing a lot more about him. Foster Moss says that's serious that a A&M wide receiver signed an NIL deal with a bail bond. I didn't see that. That's pretty funny, though. Thomas Tyson says that Juju was impressed with UGA. Listen, I'm glad to know that. Glad to know that. I think he is a good one. Thomas also says he's a legit. Yeah, when I only saw him play one time this year, but when I saw him, he was really, really polished and really very good as a freshman. It's just amazing how these quarterbacks now are just so much more advanced than they used to be, and he may be the most example of that. Memphis Doug says Juju to Georgia. It's actually pretty funny. That's pretty funny, for sure. I also think that, like, Juju, J-U, like nicknames like that are just sort of made for NIL stuff. So I'm sure he'll have. Yeah, I just feel like you want a memorable name, and there's nothing wrong with Julian Lewis as a name, but from an NIL standpoint, I just feel like Juju probably gives you a little bit more opportunity there. It's just a little bit more memorable. Jack, on the subject of some G-Day tickets. So somebody asked about this a little earlier. So my understanding is, honestly, I haven't searched this myself, but a few people have brought up the fact they haven't seen a link for like on sale date for G-Day tickets. To me, it seems like they would have already announced this. I don't really know, so maybe I'll try to find out. But I'm sure if I reach out, they're going to say we'll have some information soon. But I'll try to reach out and see what I can conclude on that. Obviously in years past, this is the same thing I said on our first and 15 a little earlier. So if you've been with us for the entire time, I apologize. Years past, G-Day was just free to enter. I'm all tangled up my cords. Hold on a second. I got all tangled up there for a minute. Hold on. Yeah, so in years past, G-Day was free to enter. You just, they had people at the gates, but you just sort of walked right in. I think it was last year for the first time they kind of did or maybe it was 2021. They kind of did a little bit of a ticketing thing to kind of control the crowd a little bit better, get access to tickets, which even though there's a little bit of money associated with that, probably made the actual act of getting in the stadium maybe a little bit more convenient. There is some construction on the south side of the stadium right now. I don't know if that's what's, led to maybe, I don't even know if it is a delay in terms of a non-sale date. But if there is a delay, maybe it's related to the fact there is some south side construction going on right now. The point is there are a lot of unknown variables here, but I'll see if I can try to find something out for you. Let's see what else. Let's see what else. Quabna Fields asked about Ra Thomas. Yeah, Ra-Ra's out there. Ra-Ra's going through spring practice. Ra and Dominic Lovett. So both those new receivers in place there. It sounds like, talking to some of the guys who are watching today, it sounds like, they both are kind of bringing their energy here a little bit. Let me go to Facebook for a moment. or on Facebook. Ken Holcomb says, I challenge anyone on here to say NCAA faster than BA does. Yeah. So like, everybody's got their thing, right? And one of my things is I just talk way too fast. It's one of the reasons why I like doing a show by myself, is because doing it by myself does challenge me to sort of slow down a little bit, and I kind of create a pace for myself that's a little bit better. But I typically talk a little too fast from time to time. Let's see what else. Matt Rukavina says, don't sleep on San Diego State. I mean, they are a little bit of a darling of some, for sure. Matthew Goodwin says it's March 28th for general public G-Day tickets. So there you go. Has that always been the case, Matthew, or is that just recently announced? Let's see what else. How about this? Eric DeVorncy Sr. says, big shout out to my younger brother, inducted into the Thomaston Sports Hall of Fame this weekend. Boy, that's a good area for athletics, so that's a real honor for sure. Real honor for sure. Joseph Kennedy says UCLA could beat Gonzaga. I think that's probably the best Sweet 16 game. UCLA Gonzaga, probably the best. Jeremy Lloyd on the subject of Swainsboro. Yeah, Swainsboro's happy right now for sure. They're happy right now. Tennille Calvino likes those uniforms. Yeah, they're nice. They're nice. William Camacho, thank you for the condolences. I appreciate that. Thank you. It's been a hard year. And, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that it hasn't. Now, you still got a job to do. You show up and do it. But, I mean, it's just been a lousy year. It just has been. Some of the subject matter around Georgia has been all that great. And then, obviously, you've been dealing with this family stuff. And, unfortunately, I don't think we're quite done with that on my side yet. So, it's just hard. It's just hard. But a lot of you have your own stories to tell, and they're even more challenging than mine is. I certainly get that. Let's see what else. But thank you for the kind words, though. Rambo, also thank you there for as well. Andrew Sisson, thank you there too. James Lawson, a lot of Georgia and Olive, thank you guys so much. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. You guys are all really very kind. I do appreciate that. It's more one of those things of, I just want you guys to be aware that, there's obviously, Wednesday's probably looking a little different for us, and, give you a couple of days to be aware of that. Let's see what else. Taylor Russell, thank you for the kind words. I really, you'll never know how much those words mean to me. You'll never know how much they mean to me. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I think the thing that's, I promise I won't talk about this the whole time. I think the thing that's the hardest about this for me is that, like for so many of us, especially those of us who are guys, you look towards your wife, the mother of your kids, and she's sort of the rock that holds the family together. And when you see her shaken, that's disconcerting. It's disconcerting because that's just not what you're used to seeing. But this is her mother, and this is my kid's grandmother, and the family stability that you really lean on is just obviously punctured because of all of that. And so, I'm amazed by how tough and strong my wife has been through all of this. But nonetheless, is that you still sort of see her dealing with an emotional way that you've never seen her go through. And some of you, as I said before, can have your own stories to tell on something like that. Paul Moon, getting back to football for a moment, said, I wouldn't have said that wide receiver was stacked until Ra-Ra Lovett got here. But he said, just like Bama, we hoard those blue chippers. I think that's an interesting way to describe this. So I think that Georgia at wide receiver, prior to the transfers, is probably a little bit better on paper than we're used to them being. I mean, Ladd McConkey had, statistically speaking, as good a year as almost any Georgia receiver has had in the Kirby Smart era. He's coming back. I think that Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint was an incredibly valuable piece for Georgia. his overall numbers, there were obviously a handful of players that had more receptions and yards than he had last year, but how many big catches did it seem like Rosemary-Jacksaint had for Georgia last year? He's coming back. I think there's real reason to be excited about Arian Smith. There was that one video, and I never quite figured out like how that one video kind of got shared around quite so much. But there's a video that came out, of course, the weekend of Smith just blowing past one of the young defensive backs. I mean, just gone. And that's what he can do. I mean, like, that is home run speed. And it seems like now Arian Smith is as healthy as he's been at Georgia. And, boy, that is really, really potentially valuable too. So, to use Paul's point, okay, so with the homegrown stuff that Georgia has, you're already arguably better receiver than you usually are. In the case of Ra Thomas, this was Mississippi State's top receiver from a year ago. And you can maybe say some of those yards were kind of padded because of the Leach offense. Maybe that's the case. In the case of Dominic Lovett, y'all, we've said this over and over again. Lovett was one of the best receivers in the dadgum league last year. He had nearly 900 yards receiving. Like, bringing him in here was a huge deal. And the thing about Georgia coverage is there is so much going on that you almost never get a chance to really fully focus on any one thing as much as you possibly could. But this was a very, very big deal for Georgia. I think that Smoke Bowie can be, a big deal transfer on the defensive side there as well. But, there's a reason that Georgia didn't take the transfer player a year ago and took 3 of them this year. The difference is that when they looked around last year, maybe they didn't see anybody that was kind of the level to provide them, what they wanted. But this year, they saw defensive back capable of playing. That's Bowie. Wide receivers, even for a sort of a deeper than normal Georgia wide receiver situation, you saw guys that could step on and have the potential to make immediate impact. In the case of Lovett, he may turn out to be Georgia's best receiver. No disrespect to some of the guys I mentioned a moment ago, but Lovett may push to be that because he had big numbers a year ago. Even though Missouri wanted to feature Luther Burden and didn't have any quarterback to speak of whatsoever, Lovett still had a very big season. That is an incredibly valuable commodity here in the Georgia offense, and we've said that before. I'm led to believe, in fact, I have it on pretty good authority, that Georgia was also looking at a transfer player potentially at a couple of other positions, but it didn't really find someone that was at the Georgia level at those positions. In other words, Georgia doesn't take transfer player just because it has a need to fill. Georgia takes transfer player if there is a need that it'd like to fill matched up with a player at the talent level that it's looking for. So some of the positions where it would have considered taking transfer, that dude just wasn't there. But at wide receiver and defensive back, there was a Georgia-level player available, and so Georgia struck to get them. Taylor Russell says Dylan Bell looks promising as well. Yeah, I mean, that's that guy that – this is maybe not a perfect comparison, but for some reason he kind of reminds me of Kearis Jackson a little bit. He's going to probably line up and do some things differently. But the thing about Kearis that you always notice was, if you're up close and personal with him, is he was just kind of rocked up a little bit. He sort of looked a little bit like a running back. And I would say that Bell kind of looks that way too. That bigger build, I think benefited Kearis during his career, and I think it's going to make him an NFL player too for somebody. And then Bell kind of looks that way to me right now. This is not one of those, skinny little weeds out there playing wide receiver. This is a guy's got a little bit of that going on. Let's see what else. G. Grace Bamboy says, it comes down to coaching when you have stacked teams. The talent is there. Bad coach is going to ruin a team. Ask Bama and Clemson. There's an extent to which I believe that G. Grace is correct by saying that. In other words, I truly believe that coaching still matters at the college level. I really, really do. That you could have stacked talent, and if you have a mediocre offensive coordinator, I do think you're going to put the governor on the production. I do. Conversely, you could have somewhat average talent, mid-round draft pick type guys, but if you've got a top flight, offensive mind, that offense is going to really thrive, because the job of the coordinator is to scheme guys open pre-snap. And so many great offensive coordinators are capable of doing that you don't just rely on the talent to emerge when the ball is snapped. You put them in a position to succeed prior to the snap. And, when you've got a really good one like that, you got it. James Gay says, shout out to Kennesaw State for a great game against Xavier. Too bad they lost, but lots to be proud of. I agree with that there as well. Now, I'll admit that some of the family stuff I've been dealing with was kind of really taking place during that Kennesaw State-Xavier game. So I know there was controversy at the end of the game. I'm aware of that. I actually don't know what the controversy really is, though. I just know that I just know there was controversy. So I hate the fact that they lost. I mean, for a while there, it seemed like just trying to follow this via social media and whatnot, it seemed like they were likely on their way to winning the game, and then they lost, and it sounds like a lot of folks thought they got jobbed on a bad call, which I did not see. But I do hate for the Owls. Their season came to an end. Foster, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. A lot of folks talking about Sean Washington, his departure from UGA. Yeah, you wish him well with that next chapter, for sure. Let's see what else. Randy Hall says Arian Smith's got pro-type credentials. His combine time's going to earn him money. Yeah, I mean, he's really, really, really fast. Let's see what else. And DT also says, he needs to show his ability to stay healthy. I would agree with that. I mean, look, football is one of those deals where there just isn't a free lunch, that everything that provides you good on one side has a downside to it. In other words, you can bulk up and be stronger, but you are going to be a little slower. You can, stay lean and mean and be incredibly fast, but in a full contact collision sport like football, that smaller frame is going to make you more fragile. We think that Alabama has probably invested a little too much in recent years in guys that have smaller frames. And when you have, those tiny little ankles that make you really fast, it also makes you prone to injury. At least we think, in a sport that, provides so many opportunities for violent collisions. And so Arian Smith is an example of that. It's like, if you want to be as fast as Arian is, you have to build your body the way that Arian's body is built, but it does make you more prone to injury in football. Occasionally you have, like, what is it, DK Metcalf, guys like that who seem to have the perfect combination of the strength and the speed. Darnell's a little bit of an example of that too at his size. But for the most part, you still have to make a choice. Am I strong or am I fast? And choosing to be one makes you less so of the other, and that's just kind of a fact. West GA Dog fan says, read where Andrew Paul may be in better shape now than he was when he hurt his knee, before he hurt his knee. Says, I know he's not a contact player yet, but sounds like he's got the focus and ready to compete. I have no doubt that a lot of that's probably true. You kind of wonder, will you see the best version of him this year, or is it more like a Nick Chubb thing where, and I honestly don't, I mean, the Chubb injury in 2015 was very serious. That's probably about as serious a knee injury as I think you can suffer, but just because of the, gosh knows I'm not a doctor, but the number of ways in which that knee got torn up for Chubb on that hideous Tennessee turf. So I don't know if the Paul injury was anywhere near that serious, but you do know with Chubb is that what he was in 2017 far different than what he was in 2016. So even though he's still a 1,000-yard rusher, he was just a much better player 2 years removed. So you kind of wonder what the outlook would be in terms of, because I think even Kirby sort of compared him to Chubb a little bit. What does that outlook mean for him on the field this year? How close to 100% can he be that 1 year removed on something like that? All right, final trooper in the comment section. We're going to get ready to go for today. David West, getting ready to celebrate a happy birthday. David, happy birthday to you. Joel Moody says, I didn't know until recently that Kendall Milton led the SEC in yards per carry. Yeah, I mean, listen, Kendall's got a chance to really be a star player. Now, will that work out for him? He's another one of those guys that wants to show his ability to remain durable and stay healthy, but there's no doubt that he has stardom potential. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Michael Sumner wants to give the G-Day money to the basketball team. Kind of like your high school team does the bake sale, that Georgia will raise some money for the basketball team via the G-Day crowd. That's kind of funny, for sure. All right. Anything else on the Facebook side? Back on YouTube for a moment. No, I did not see this. Is Branson Roberts really wearing 0? I didn't see that. I guess I probably should have seen that, but I didn't. I did not see that. That's actually kind of cool. I did see where I guess 0 is being cleared as an NFL number now, so that could be good news for Darnell there. Spencer Clark also pointing out something pretty important is that some of the best receivers of all time were not necessarily all that fast for their position. Jerry Rice is an example of that. There have been plenty of, I think Jerry Rice would be downright considered slow now, and yet during a game, no one could tackle him. I'm always kind of fascinated with that, but the idea of game speed, some guys just play fast. They couldn't outrun you, but you can't catch up to them when the actual game is being played. Like, how is that? It seems to be real. It seems to exist. We've seen plenty of examples of that, but it also kind of defies explanation there too. All right. Paul Moon, the subject of Calvin Johnson. Yeah, that's like one of those few former Tech players that I don't think you'll hear a Georgia fan say any bad words about at all. For sure. Oh, it's Roderick Robinson who's wearing 0. My bad. Roderick Robinson. Pardon me on that. Pardon me. Well, there you go. Yeah, so sorry about that, y'all. I should have already known that, I guess, but I didn't. All right, we got to go for now. Thanks for being here, y'all. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. It's going to be 80 before the end of the week. That means we're almost to like full-fledged springtime here. So go ahead and be thinking about getting the air conditioning unit tuned up. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. You have a great day. See you back here tomorrow, 9:45 for our first and 15, 10 a.m. after that for DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.